The notification sound from my phone echoed through my hotel room in Prague at 3:47 a.m. local time. I'd been in the Czech Republic for 2 weeks conducting financial oversight for an international banking compliance audit, the kind of methodical, boring work that made my family's eyes glaze over whenever they asked what I did for a living. Government stuff, I'd always say, which was technically true. What I didn't mention was that my government stuff involved tracking money laundering networks across 17 countries for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. My brother Marcus had sent a photo to our family group chat. A sold sign planted firmly in front of my modest 2-bedroom house in Arlington, Virginia. The house I'd bought 3 years ago for $285,000, well below my actual budget, but perfect for someone who traveled internationally 8 months out of the year and needed something small, secure and forgettable. Finally got rid of that starter home albatross. Marcus had typed, followed by 3 celebration emojis. Investors paid $400,000 cash. Maya's going to thank me when she stops playing government desk jockey and gets a real job that can afford something decent. The responses came flooding in immediately. Mom, thank God someone in this family has business sense. Dad, about time Maya stopped throwing money at that mortgage. My sister Jessica, maybe now she can afford somewhere actually nice instead of that basic little box. I stared at the screen, my coffee growing cold as I read through 17 messages celebrating Marcus's initiative in saving me from my poor financial decisions. According to the family narrative, my modest government salary barely covered my mortgage payments, and I was probably underwater on the loan. They'd been dropping hints for months about how I should cut my losses and rent somewhere more reasonable. What they didn't know was that my house wasn't just my house. When you work for FinCEN with Level 3 security clearance, every financial asset gets registered with federal oversight systems. My mortgage payments, property taxes, insurance claims, everything flows through automated monitoring designed to flag unusual activity that might indicate compromise, coercion, or foreign influence. It's standard protocol for anyone with access to classified financial intelligence networks. What they especially didn't know was that selling federal monitored property without authorization triggers automatic investigation protocols within 6 hours. I screenshot Marcus's messages and forwarded them to my supervisor, Janet Morrison, with a simple note: unauthorized property transfer. Please advise. Then I went back to my banking audit spreadsheets, because international money laundering networks don't investigate themselves. The family celebration continued throughout my Tuesday morning in Prague. Marcus posted photos of himself at a steakhouse, toasting with champagne. To smart financial decisions and family looking out for family, he'd captioned it. Mom shared the post with her church group about her son's business acumen. Dad forwarded the story to his golf buddies about teaching his kids real estate savvy. By the time I landed at Dulles International Airport Thursday evening, 17 federal agents were already involved in what the case files would later classify as significant wire fraud and identity theft targeting federal employee assets. I took the metro home from the airport, my single carry-on bag feeling light after 2 weeks of living minimally. The house looked exactly the same from the outside: neat lawn, painted shutters, nothing flashy or attention-grabbing. The sold sign was gone, but Marcus had posted about that too, explaining how quickly cash investors close deals when they smell opportunity. Inside, everything was exactly where I'd left it. My books, my coffee maker, my security system still armed and functional. Marcus had somehow managed to conduct an entire real estate transaction without ever entering the property or providing any legitimate documentation. According to the federal investigation files Janet had sent me during my layover in Frankfurt, he'd used forged power of attorney documents and fabricated financial hardship claims. Friday morning, I made coffee in my kitchen and opened my laptop to catch up on 2 weeks of accumulated case files. The FinCEN database showed $400,000 in wire transfers that had triggered automatic scrutiny the moment they connected to my Social Security number and federal employment records. Multiple banks had filed suspicious activity reports. The FBI's Financial Crime Unit had opened a case within 18 hours of the first transfer. I was reading through the criminal charges when my phone started buzzing with family calls. Marcus called first, his voice tight with confusion. "Maya, there's some kind of mistake. FBI agents just showed up at my office. They're asking about your house sale and saying something about federal property violations." "I'm sure it's just paperwork," I said, stirring my coffee. Government bureaucracy, you know how it is. Mom called 30 minutes later, her voice higher pitched than usual. They arrested Marcus at his real estate office. In front of clients, Maya. They're saying he committed federal crimes, but that doesn't make sense. He was helping you. I'm sure there's an explanation, I replied. These things usually work themselves out. Dad called next, anger replacing confusion. What kind of government job do you have that gets your brother arrested for helping with a house sale? This is insane. By Friday afternoon, the family group chat had devolved into panic and blame. Jessica posted a frantic message asking if anyone had a good criminal defense lawyer. Mom shared an article about federal sentences for wire fraud. Dad posted repeatedly about government overreach and bureaucratic insanity. I replied once, federal agencies don't arrest people without evidence. I'm sure Marcus will be able to explain everything to them. Saturday morning, I was reviewing international banking compliance protocols when my doorbell rang. Through the security camera, I could see my parents standing on my front porch, Dad's face red with indignation and Mom clutching her purse like a shield. I opened the door in my robe and slippers, coffee mug in hand. Morning, Mom. Dad. Everything okay? Everything is not okay. Dad pushed past me into my living room, Mom following behind with tears in her eyes. Your brother is facing 7 years in federal prison because he tried to help you. The lawyer says they have recordings, forged documents, wire transfer evidence. Maya, what is happening? I settled into my reading chair, the same spot where I analyzed international financial crime networks 3 days a week when I wasn't traveling. What did Marcus tell the FBI? He told them the truth. Mom's voice cracked. That he was helping his sister who couldn't afford her mortgage payments, who was struggling with a government salary, who needed family support. Interesting, I said, taking a sip of coffee. What evidence did he provide that I couldn't afford my mortgage? Dad's face grew redder. Maya, don't play games. We all know government jobs don't pay well. We know you've been struggling since you bought this place. Marcus was trying to help. Help with what specifically? With getting out from under this mortgage before you defaulted. Mom gestured around my living room. Before you ruined your credit and embarrassed the family. I nodded thoughtfully. Did Marcus mention that he never asked me about selling? Or that he forged power of attorney documents? Or that he fabricated financial hardship claims to justify the transaction? He was protecting you from having to make a difficult decision. Dad's voice reached that familiar volume that meant he expected compliance through intimidation. Family takes care of family. That's interesting, I said. Because according to the FBI, what Marcus actually did was commit identity theft, wire fraud, and illegal transfer of federal monitored property. Those are felonies, Dad. Federal monitored property? Mom's voice dropped to a whisper. What does that mean? I set down my coffee mug and looked at my parents, really looked at them. Dad in his weekend golf outfit, Mom in her church dress, both of them frantically trying to understand how their son's smart business decision had become a federal crime scene. When you work for the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network with Level 3 security clearance, every asset gets registered with federal oversight systems, I explained calmly. My house, my bank accounts, my investments, everything gets monitored for unusual activity that might indicate compromise or coercion. Dad's mouth opened and closed without sound. Marcus's forged documents triggered automatic investigation protocols within 6 hours, I continued. The wire transfers he arranged flagged multiple suspicious activity reports across 3 banks. The FBI's Financial Crime Unit opened a case Tuesday morning. But you work at a desk. Mom protested. You said you do government paperwork. I analyze international money laundering networks, I said. I track financial crimes across 17 countries. I help build cases against organizations that move billions of dollars illegally through global banking systems. The silence stretched long enough for my coffee to grow cold. The house isn't my starter home, Mom. It's my secure residence while I travel internationally 8 months per year conducting financial oversight. I paid cash for it 3 years ago. The mortgage you're worried about doesn't exist. Dad collapsed into my couch like his legs had given out. Cash. $285,000 full purchase price, no financing. It's registered with federal authorities as the primary residence of a classified clearance financial crimes investigator. Which means Marcus didn't just forge documents to steal my house. He committed federal crimes against monitored government property. Mom was crying now, quiet tears that she wiped away with shaking hands. We thought you were struggling. You drive an old Honda, you shop at discount stores, you never talk about money. Security protocols, I said gently. People in my position live modestly to avoid drawing attention. We don't display wealth or discuss financial details. It's basic operational security. Dad looked around my living room with new eyes, taking in details he'd never noticed before. The high-end security system disguised as basic home protection. The reinforced windows that looked standard but weren't. The communication equipment that appeared to be simple internet hardware. How much do you make? He asked quietly. Enough to own this house outright, maintain an investment portfolio worth more than Marcus's entire real estate business, and live comfortably while traveling internationally for work, I replied. The financial hardship Marcus claimed to justify the sale doesn't exist and never has. My phone buzzed with a text from Janet Morrison. Arraignment scheduled Monday. 3 felony counts. Identity theft, wire fraud, federal property violations. Sentencing guidelines indicate 4 to 7 years federal prison. I showed my parents the message. 7 years. Mom whispered. Federal sentencing guidelines are standardized, I explained. Wire fraud involving amounts over $250,000 carries mandatory minimums. Identity theft adds consecutive time. Violations involving federal employee property add additional penalties. Dad stared at the text message. Can you do something? Talk to someone. I already did, I said. I forwarded Marcus's confession text to my supervisor Tuesday morning, as required by federal employee protocols when family members commit crimes involving our assets. Confession texts? Mom looked confused. I pulled up the family group chat and read Marcus's messages aloud. Sold your cute little house to real investors. Finally got rid of that starter home albatross. Investors paid $400,000 cash. Maya's going to thank me when she stops playing government desk jockey. Those are admissions of unauthorized property transfer, fabricated financial justification, and intent to commit fraud, I continued. Along with the forged documents and wire transfer evidence, they constitute a complete federal case. The room fell silent again. Outside, a neighbor was mowing their lawn, the sound normal and domestic and completely disconnected from the federal crime scene we were discussing. What happens now? Dad asked finally. Marcus gets arraigned Monday on 3 felony counts. His lawyer will probably recommend a plea bargain to avoid the maximum 7-year sentence. The wire transfers will be reversed, but he'll likely face significant fines and restitution in addition to prison time. And the family? Mom's voice was barely audible. The family learns that underestimating someone doesn't give you the right to commit crimes against them, I said. And that federal employees take security protocols seriously, even when our families think we're just playing government desk jockey. I stood up and walked to my kitchen, refilling my coffee mug while my parents sat in stunned silence. Through the window, I could see my neighborhood continuing its normal Saturday routine, kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs, families washing cars and driveways. For 3 years, you've assumed I was financially struggling because I drive a Honda and shop at Target, I said, returning to the living room. You never asked about my actual situation. You never considered that someone might choose modesty for professional reasons. We were trying to help, Mom said weakly. By committing federal crimes without my knowledge or consent? I asked. By forging legal documents and fabricating financial hardship? By stealing my property and celebrating it in family group chats? Dad looked up at me with something that might have been recognition. You're not who we thought you were. I'm exactly who I've always been, I replied. You just never asked the right questions. My phone rang. Janet Morrison calling with updates on the federal investigation. I answered while my parents sat processing the complete reversal of their assumptions about my life, my work, and my capabilities. Maya, the FBI wants to interview you Monday before the arraignment, Janet said. Standard procedure for federal employee asset crimes. They'll need your testimony about the unauthorized transfer and the family dynamic that enabled it. Of course, I said. Send me the briefing materials. Also, the bank's fraud investigation found evidence that your brother researched federal employee salaries online before forging the hardship documentation. It suggests premeditation rather than misguided family assistance. I looked at my parents, both of them staring at me like they were seeing a stranger. That's consistent with the timeline. He's been making comments about government salaries for months. The prosecutor thinks this strengthens the case significantly. Premeditated fraud against federal property carries enhanced penalties. After I hung up, Mom asked, "What was that about?" The FBI found evidence that Marcus researched federal employee salaries before forging documents claiming I couldn't afford my mortgage, I explained. It suggests he knew he was committing fraud rather than helping family. Dad put his head in his hands. This keeps getting worse. Federal investigations are thorough, I said. They don't arrest people based on misunderstandings. Mom stood up slowly, her purse clutched against her chest like armor. What do we tell people? Our church, our neighbors, our friends. You tell them that Marcus committed federal crimes and is facing the consequences, I replied. Or you tell them nothing. That's your choice. Dad looked up from his hands. Will you visit him? In prison? I considered the question while finishing my coffee. That depends on whether he takes responsibility for his crimes or continues blaming others for the consequences of his choices. He was trying to help, Mom said one more time, but her voice carried no conviction. He was committing felonies, I corrected gently. The motivation doesn't change the legal reality. They left 20 minutes later, walking to their car like people carrying invisible weight. I watched from my window as Dad struggled to start the engine, his hands shaking enough to make the keys rattle. Sunday evening, the family group chat exploded with news that Marcus had fired his first lawyer and hired a criminal defense specialist who cost $500 per hour. Jessica posted frantically asking if anyone could help with legal fees. Dad shared articles about federal sentencing guidelines and prison conditions. I didn't respond to any of it. Monday morning, I dressed in my standard federal interview attire, conservative suit, minimal jewelry, professional but unmemorable. The FBI field office was a 40-minute drive from my house, through Northern Virginia traffic that moved like cold syrup. Special Agent Rebecca Chen conducted the interview in a sterile conference room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. She recorded everything while I provided testimony about Marcus's unauthorized access to my financial information, his fabricated claims about my mortgage difficulties, and the family dynamic that had enabled his assumption that he could commit crimes on my behalf. Your brother's defense attorney is claiming this was a misunderstanding between family members, Agent Chen said, reviewing her notes. That he genuinely believed you were struggling financially and needed assistance. Agent Chen, I work for FinCEN with Level 3 security clearance, I replied. My financial assets are monitored by federal systems specifically designed to detect unauthorized activity. If I were actually struggling with mortgage payments, those systems would have flagged it years ago. And your family was unaware of your actual position and clearance level? My family was unaware that I analyzed international financial crimes for a living, yes. They assumed I was a low-level government clerk because I live modestly and don't discuss my work. Is there any scenario where your brother could have reasonably believed you needed financial assistance? I thought about 3 years of family dinners where they'd made jokes about my government salary. 3 years of comments about my starter home and my basic lifestyle. 3 years of assumptions based on their own limitations rather than actual evidence. Agent Chen, in 3 years, Marcus never asked about my financial situation directly. He never asked about my mortgage balance, my income, or my expenses. He made assumptions based on stereotypes about government employees and acted on those assumptions without verification. And the forged power of attorney documents? Require knowledge that you're committing fraud, I said. You don't accidentally forge legal documents. The arraignment took place Monday afternoon in federal district court. A solemn proceeding where Marcus stood before a judge in a gray suit that hung loose on his frame. He looked smaller than I remembered, diminished by the federal courthouse architecture and the weight of 3 felony charges. I sat in the gallery watching as the prosecutor outlined the case. $400,000 in fraudulent wire transfers, forged legal documents, identity theft targeting a federal employee, and unauthorized transfer of federal monitored property. The evidence included Marcus's own text messages celebrating the smart business decision, and research records showing he'd looked up federal salary ranges before fabricating hardship claims. Marcus pled not guilty, his voice barely audible even with the courtroom microphones. His lawyer requested bail reduction based on family support and community ties. The prosecutor argued that someone willing to commit premeditated fraud against federal employee assets represented a flight risk. The judge set bail at $150,000 cash, noting that wire fraud targeting federal employees carried enhanced penalties and that the defendant had demonstrated willingness to commit document fraud. As the courtroom cleared, Marcus's lawyer approached me in the hallway. "Ms. Chen, my client's family is hoping you might consider requesting leniency from the prosecutor's office. This was a misunderstanding that got out of hand. Your client committed 3 felonies based on assumptions he never bothered to verify," I replied. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's criminal negligence. He was trying to help family." "He was committing crimes against family," I corrected. "Without permission, without knowledge, and without legal authority." The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "A character statement from you could make a significant difference in sentencing." "I'll provide whatever testimony the federal prosecutor requests," I said. "My character assessment will be based on facts, not family relationships." 6 weeks later, Marcus pled guilty to 2 of the 3 felony charges in exchange for a recommended sentence of 4 years federal prison plus restitution and fines. The wire fraud and identity theft charges carried mandatory minimums that his lawyer couldn't negotiate away. The family gathered for the sentencing hearing, sitting together in the courthouse gallery like mourners at a funeral. Mom cried quietly while Dad stared straight ahead with the expression of someone still trying to understand how helping family had become a federal crime. During victim impact statements, I stood before the judge and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Your Honor, the defendant committed these crimes based on assumptions about my financial situation that he never attempted to verify. He forged legal documents, fabricated hardship claims, and transferred property without authorization because he believed his judgment was superior to mine. The impact extends beyond financial harm. When someone violates your security protocols and federal monitoring systems, it threatens your clearance, your career, and your ability to serve your country. The defendant's actions could have compromised my position with the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network. I ask the court to consider that federal employees depend on security protocols to protect both classified information and personal safety. The defendant's willingness to override those protocols represents a fundamental disregard for national security measures." The judge sentenced Marcus to 4 years and 2 months in federal prison, plus $425,000 in restitution and fines. He would serve his time at a minimum security facility in Pennsylvania, eligible for early release after 3 years with good behavior. After the sentencing, the family gathered in the courthouse parking lot, unsure what to say or do next. Jessica hugged Mom while Dad stood apart, looking like a man who'd discovered his map was upside down. "For years," Mom said to no one in particular. 4 years in prison for trying to help. 4 years for committing federal crimes," I corrected gently. "The motivation doesn't change the legal consequences." Dad looked at me with eyes that held something between respect and fear. "We never really knew you, did we? You knew exactly who I told you I was," I replied. "You just decided it wasn't impressive enough to be true." I drove home alone through Northern Virginia traffic that moved normally despite the fact that everything had changed. My house looked the same from the outside, modest, unremarkable, easily underestimated. Inside, I made coffee and opened my laptop to review case files from an international banking investigation spanning 12 countries and $2.3 billion in laundered assets. The family group chat stayed quiet for 3 months after the sentencing. No more celebration emojis, no more business advice, no more assumptions about who could afford what or who needed help from whom. When they finally started talking again, it was different. Careful, respectful. The casual dismissal of my government job disappeared, replaced by tentative questions about my work that I answered with the same professional discretion I'd always maintained. Marcus wrote me one letter from federal prison, 6 months into his sentence. He apologized for the crimes and acknowledged that he'd never asked about my actual financial situation before deciding I needed his help. He said prison had given him time to think about the difference between helping someone and controlling them. I wrote back once, a brief note confirming that I hoped he used his time constructively and that federal prison libraries had excellent resources for learning about financial crimes and their consequences. The family learned slowly that underestimating someone doesn't give you the right to make decisions for them. That assumptions can become crimes when you act on them without verification. That federal employees take security protocols seriously, even when their families think they're just playing government desk jockey. And I learned that sometimes the most effective boundary setting happens in federal court, with a judge and a gavel and consequences that can't be argued away or dismissed as family drama. 4 years was a long time to think about the difference between helping and controlling, between family support and criminal behavior, between government paperwork and international financial crimes investigation. But some lessons are worth the time it takes to learn them properly.